Man, it's good to be back and worshiping God and being here with my family. And I don't just mean my direct family right here, I mean my family. This week we're going to be talking about 4 guys that had the fire that Tom was just talking about that lived inside of them. And we're going to be in the book of Daniel, okay? And we're going to be going through about the first 4 chapters here. We're going to be going through talking about these guys called Daniel, Hananiah, Micheal, and Azariah. Some of them known better as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. In chapter 1 right here, we find where Nebuchadnezzar had sent his chief eunuch out, and he had he'd sent them to the temple, and they came across these 4 guys because they wanted to choose 4 people who were in Judah's royal family and other noble families. So they wanted educated young guys. They wanted people who had who they knew had been well taken care of, had been well nourished. They would have been fit, and so he brought forth these 4 guys here. And I think that it was really interesting because whenever let me scoot this up a little bit. I'm having a hard time seeing. Right up there. Okay. So Nebuchadnezzar said, make sure that they are very well versed in every branch of learning. Make sure that they are gifted with knowledge and good judgment, and that they are suited to serve in the royal palace. Train these young men in the literature and language of Babylon, and the king assigned them a daily ration of food and wine. So I told you guys this morning, if you're friends with me on Facebook, that I had 2 special guests. Well, I have these special guests here. Where's the back here? Okay, you guys ready? Come here. So here's our special guest this morning. We've got Mr. Bellamy. We've got Mr. Maddox. And so Nebuchadnezzar, whenever he made the decree for these, here, come here, right here, for these guys, see, he said that one, he wanted to change their family. So we got their ball hats here because that's their team. So we're changing their team, right? So now they're on a new team. They got a new family. So, but he didn't stop there. He said, we're going to change what they know. We're going to change their education. Okay, they were raised up over here, and so we're going to change their education a little bit. And we're going to teach them our side. Here, and so now that we've changed our education, well, we're going to make sure that they stay healthy, and we're going to put them and give them new food. I think it's the other way, but it'll work. Here you go, man. All right, turn. Oh my goodness. So now then, as we see, we've changed their family, we've changed their education, and we've changed what they're eating so that maybe make sure that they're too healthy. I chose the best because, you know, if we get to eating too healthy, sometimes in vest they change, they don't fit no more. So it's really interesting though, because what did I change? I changed their outward appearance, right? And that's what Nebuchadnezzar changed. He changed their outward appearance. He didn't change their inward appearance. And I want to talk today about what this inward appearance wound up having the result of. Thank you, boys. You guys can go have a seat. They came out this morning dressed just like this. for church. And I said, all right, I'm going to have to use it. Because they were committed to wearing that to church. So, all right, so we've got these guys, and we got Daniel, we got Shadrach, we got Meshach, and we got Abednego. And as the story progresses through, they've the first little challenge that they come up with is they're going to give them new food. And Daniel said, I'm not going to eat your food. I'm going to stick with what my food is. Okay? And whenever Daniel does that, he says, test me. Right? And then after a little bit of time, they sent somebody over there. And the ones that these other people that they had been feeding the king's food, and they tested that against the 4 of them, and the 4 of them were healthier than the other ones. And they were only eating like greens, okay? They didn't have all the steaks and all the stuff that was being fed to them. And so it was a sign to them that these guys were special. They didn't need the king's food to be nourished. They were receiving their nourishment and getting bigger and better and stronger without all of that, okay? It set them apart. And so, as we continue through this story, Nebuchadnezzar has this dream, okay? And during this dream, it scares him to death, right? And so he continues on, and he sends out this decree to say, if anybody can come, tell me my dream and interpret it, that I need to know. And so he sent out for the astrologers. He sent out for the, let me get everybody specific here. He sent out for astrologers. He sent out for, oh man, I needed to highlight this. I didn't have all the time in the world to prep like I wanted to have everything perfectly spread out. I just knew what God was trying to speak to me through it. And so, the sorcerers, the astrologers, people that would have been fortune tellers, magicians, the enchanters, guys like these, he sent out for all of them to come and tell him what his dream was and interpret it for him. And I think it was really interesting because all of them had the same response for the king. They said, well, you tell me what your dream was and I'll interpret it for you. And he heard this so many times that he finally got tired of it and said, look, if you continue to tell me, if you continue to ask me what my dream was, I'll have you ripped limb from limb. And so now then they're all like, well, actually I didn't really know. I was just going to sit over here on the side, and I thought maybe I could help out, but maybe I shouldn't. And then you get Daniel, because what happened was he got so fed up with it, he actually put out a decree to kill all the wise men, right? And then it was brought to Daniel, and Daniel said, all right, hold on, I'll go have a conversation with this guy. And so he goes and has a conversation with Nebuchadnezzar, and he tells him what his dream was, because God had given him Nebuchadnezzar's dream in a dream, so that way he could be able to recite back to him what his dream was. And then not only did he just tell him what his dream was, he interpreted it for him, right? And he said, surely your God is the God of gods, right? And so it's really interesting. So this inward fire that we're talking about. Daniel had this relationship with God. God imparted onto him this dream to be able to reassure Nebuchadnezzar that this was true. And so it convinced Nebuchadnezzar that his God was the one true God, because how else could he have done it, right? And then we fast forward, and Nebuchadnezzar rewards Daniel and puts him as a part of his cabinet. And so now Daniel is in a high position with him. And Nebuchadnezzar, whereas he's starting to learn and believe who God is, he still falls off in some of his old stuff, some of his old teachings. And this is where Nebuchadnezzar has this golden statue made. And in this golden statue, he puts out a decree that all the people and all the races need to come and they need to bow their knee to this statue and worship this idol. And then we got those three guys that we talked about at the beginning, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they said, no, we're not doing that. Right? And so Nebuchadnezzar says, well, I'm going to throw you in this burning furnace. That's what he comes to the conclusion of. He says, well, if you're not going to follow these rules, and the truth of it is Nebuchadnezzar's courtship actually brought this back to him and said, they are not following the rules of your kingdom. And so he had to make the decision, how am I going to handle this? I'm still a ruler. I still have an expectation to behold. I still have these decrees that I have to put in place. And so his decree was, we're going to put them in the furnace, and we're going to crank that sucker up as high as we can get it. And so Nebuchadnezzar, they're in there, they're in the furnace, and then he says, so they tied them up, and they threw them into the furnace, fully dressed in their pants, turbans, robes, and other garments. And because of the king in his anger had demanded such a hot fire in the furnace, the flames killed the soldiers as they threw the three men in. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, securely tied, fell into the roaring flames. But suddenly Nebuchadnezzar jumped up in amazement and exclaimed to his advisors, thank you, didn't we tie up these men and throw them into the furnace? They said, yes, your majesty, we certainly did. And they replied, look, Nebuchadnezzar shouted, I see a fourth man unbound, walking around in the fire unharmed, and the fourth man looks like a god. Then Nebuchadnezzar came as close as he could to the door of the flaming furnace and shouted, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out here. Once again, we find these people who are being faithful to their relationship with God, creating a way for Nebuchadnezzar to now see who God was. You see, I think it's really interesting on this topic of going from a place of hurting to a place of healing to a place of hosting. You see, I originally did my studying on Azariah in here. And Azariah being ripped from his family, being torn down, and his identity being stripped of him. See, with him being taken by the chief eunuch, if you know what a eunuch means that he was castrated, and this means being taken by the chief eunuch. It is likely that it was a common practice. It doesn't say it in here, but it was likely that it was a common practice as being underneath him that they were castrated as well. The point behind this was to make it to where they no longer had a family outside of this royal family, so that they would now identify with this being their family forevermore. This is why they did this as a part of their culture. And see, I think it's very interesting that with this guy Azariah, that as you see the progression, he was hurting because he had all these different things taken from him. But yet, whenever the test came, because let's face it, life will throw us through tests, right? And look at Azariah's test here. He was taken from his family. He had to refuse food that I'm sure looked really good. He had to make the decision that he was going to stay true to God throughout this test. And then God met him on the other side of it with his presence in that flaming furnace, right? This is where he found his healing. It's also a place where he began to host as well. And I want to talk today about the hosting aspect of this. See, Nebuchadnezzar, we all look at him in this very tragic light of just saying, man, look how you treated these people. As I've read through and studied through, I kind of began to look at Nebuchadnezzar a little differently this week. I think he was just confused. I think he was searching. And that's why he had all these different people in his cabinet, as far as the astrologists, the sorcerers, the enchanters. He had all these people with him because he was confused. And this is what solidifying that fire in our life can be. Just like Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and Daniel did for Nebuchadnezzar. That fire that burned inside of them actually wound up revealing to him who the one true God is. And I think that we can all identify with that today. If we truly allow God's presence to live inside of us, those that are around us that are searching can begin to see and develop that relationship with God. I think that it's really interesting that Nebuchadnezzar, throughout this whole process, God is searching after him. God is trying to pull him in. And you see by the end of this, Nebuchadnezzar actually says this prayer. And I think it's pretty profound that he finds himself in. See, Nebuchadnezzar finds himself, after having all these interactions, these encounters with God, and he says to the people, he says, "After this time had passed, I, Nebuchadnezzar, looked up to heaven. My sanity returned, and I praised and worshipped the Most High and honored the one who lives forever. His rule is everlasting, and his kingdom is eternal. All the people of the earth are nothing compared to him. He does as he pleases among the angels in heaven and among the people of the earth. No one can stop him or say to him, 'What do you mean by doing these things?' When my sanity returned to me, so did my honor and glory in the kingdom. My advisors and my nobles sought me out, and I was restored as the head of my kingdom. And even with greater honor than before, now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and glorify and honor the King of heaven. All his acts are just and true, and he is able to humble the proud." And it's a big difference. It's a huge difference from where he was to where he is now. And I think that this is a good example of what it means to go from this place of hurting and confusion to a place of healing and knowing who God is in our lives. You see, when we start to really walk this out with God, and we start to really accept our identity in who God created us to be, man, it can change the lives of those that are around us. And I think that we have to lay hold of this. This isn't something that we can just flirt on the line with. Really think about your sphere of influence. Who is it that's around you that needs to see the real God that lives inside of you? I'm not saying that you can't have a weak moment, and I'm not saying that you'll always get it right, because you won't. I did it wrong this week. If you were here during prayer time, you heard that I was weak. But it's not about that. It's about the perfect God that lives inside of us being able to be an example for the brokenhearted and the broken in this world, to be able to have that interaction with God. And man, there's power in that. There's real power in being able to be a host of God's presence in our lives, to where those people can start to say, there's something different about you. You've got something different. You're not the same person anymore. What's changed? How can I get a piece of that? I don't really like the person that I am. And so how do I change? How do I get to where you are? And this is where we get to be that example. They can truly see it inside of us. They can feel it. The God that created us breathed his life inside of us. You see, our spirit is the life that God breathes inside of us. It connects with all of us, right? That example that whenever we start to truly get vulnerable with one another, and we truly start to surrender to God with this, man, that's where the power's found at. See, we can show up and we can try to fake it, and we might learn a few things here and there, but it'll only get you so far. And as soon as we take this resolve of, I want to get raw and real with God, I want to get raw and real with my brother and sister, I want to get raw and real so that way I can try and find true healing in my life and walk away changed. Nebuchadnezzar had a raw and real encounter. And because he was surrounded by people, he didn't even intend for this. He didn't know what he was doing, but he was surrounded by people who had a relationship with God, ultimately changed his perspective and brought him to a place of healing, to know that he now knew the God in heaven. And that's my encouragement for all of us today, is we need to find our place in this story right here. We got to find ourselves in this Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego mentality of, I'm not going to let the world determine my identity. My inward identity is going to speak louder to the people that are around me than my outward appearance. See, I may have changed my boys' outward appearance this morning, but they're still who God created them to be on the inside, right? They may have tried to change their outward appearance this morning, or in here. They may have tried to change that, but they didn't change their inward appearance, right? They knew who they were in Christ. They knew who they were, and whenever they had, and that right there was enough to change everyone else's perspective around them. Kingdoms to come to pass came to know God as one true God because of their obedience. And that's wild, right? And so who is your kingdom that surrounds you that needs to see the one true God that lives inside of you? And how are you going to go out throughout this next week and let God shine inside of you so bright that it makes somebody ask, what's different about you? What's changed about you?